the bottom, I go back to the top.
Picture Paul McCartney hanging out at his Scotland farm in mid-1968, just having a relaxing evening when he picks up a copy of Melody Maker and sees an article about The Who. And when he reads what it's about, it lights the biggest competitive fire yet. Pete Townsend of The Who had boasted about recording the, quote, raunchiest, loudest, most ridiculous rock and roll record you've ever heard. McCartney never officially confirmed which track Townsend meant, though it was almost certainly I Can See for Miles. But when Paul finally listened to what he assumed was the song, he found it, quote, quite straight and sophisticated, nothing like the screaming chaos he'd imagined. As McCartney later recalled in the Beatles anthology, I was in Scotland and I read in Melody Maker that Pete Townsend had said, we've just made the raunchiest, loudest, most ridiculous rock and roll record you've ever heard. I never actually found out what track it was that The Who had made, but that got me going, just hearing him talk about it. So I said to the guys, I think we should do a song like that. Something really wild, and I wrote Helter Skelter. John Lennon made it clear this was entirely Paul's vision, stating in his final Playboy interview, that's Paul completely. I would never even dream of writing a song like that. There are some areas I never think about, and that is one of them. While John was dismissive of the song's meaning, he actually contributed to the chaos Paul wanted. During the session, he was reportedly running around the studio shouting and playing the bass as poorly as possible just to add to the dirtiness that Paul was chasing. The recording sessions became legendary for their intensity. On July 18th, 1968, the Beatles jammed on Helter Skelter for 5 hours, producing takes that lasted 10, 12, and an astonishing 27 minutes, the longest song they ever recorded. But those blues-based rehearsals didn't capture the fury McCartney wanted. So on September 9th, with George Martin away on holiday, 21-year-old Chris Thomas was suddenly thrust into the producer's chair while Ken Scott handled engineering duties, and the Beatles attacked the song with renewed violence. Ringo Starr remembered it vividly in the Beatles anthology. Helter Skelter was a track we did in total madness and hysterics in the studio. Sometimes you just had to shake out the jams, and with that song, Paul's bass line and my drums, Paul started screaming and shouting and made it up on the spot. McCartney screamed until his voice cracked. George Harrison set an ashtray on fire and ran around the studio with it blazing above his head. McCartney later reflected on the song's meaning in Barry Miles' biography many years from now. I was using the symbol of a Helter Skelter as a ride from the top to the bottom, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And this was the fall, the demise, the going down. You could have thought of it as a rather cute title, but it's since taken on all sorts of ominous overtones because Manson picked it up as an anthem, and since then, quite a few punk bands have done it because it is a raunchy rocker. George Harrison added in the Beatles anthology, everybody was getting on the big Beatle bandwagon, the police and the promoters and the Lord Mayors and murderers too. The Beatles were topical and they were the main thing that was written about in the world, so everybody attached themselves to us, whether it was our fault or not. It was upsetting to be associated with something so sleazy as Charles Manson. Of all of the Beatles songs, this one is probably the most rockin' one they ever did. Maybe Revolution. So I don't know, is this their most rocking song? Is this really the blueprint for heavy metal that came afterward? Some say. Either way, it's a great song and still remains a bit misunderstood. But let me know what you think.
I had Chris playing Larry Oldham when I was playing piano. Having a ball.
Tell me